Welcome to the NFL Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo. With me is Russell Clay. We made it. It was a grueling season. We've reached our destination. Tires were shredded. Oils weren't changed. And I'm talking about more your personal life than our actual pod.
My car life has been traumatic over the last month. I had to spend a significant amount of money on my brakes. And then I got an oil they were like, oh, well, we could do your oil while you're here. And I said, sure. And then they just never put the oil back in once they did the oil change. So found that out the hard way when my car stalled out the other day. And, you just drive to the closest place because I started it back up. And the guy, I go to the auto body shop and he starts looking at the car and he's like, well, oil's in there. And he starts laughing, guys. He starts laughing at me because there was no oil in it. He goes, oh, there's no oil in here. And it can fit four, bottles. And he put 3.5 to 3 3/4 of bottles in there, So that's where mine. And then last night, we were going to record this last night. Driving home, huge pothole, 2 flat tires. Awesome. Lost a bet on Ted Ginn last week for receiving yardage. I'm running cold right now. I've actually done well on the playoff slates. Else surrounding me, it's like I'm holding what's that game in Call of Duty or Halo where you hold the thing out? And it's like tag, but then you die.
That's got to be Halo. I don't know.
I'm getting shot, and my armor's down, and everything around me, but I'm still holding it. So if you ever played Halo 3, you know what I'm talking about. But so anyway, all right, let's get into the slate.
One quick thing, I do want to say thank you to all the viewers out there that have stuck with us for the whole year, tuned in. Whether you tuned in once or you tuned in 5 times or you tuned in once and then left and then came back for this week for some reason, I do want to thank you for all of our viewers out there.
Yeah, and the spam bots, we appreciate those comments. Those Italian rugs for sale.
If we need theme music, thank you for all the people that leave us their theme music links in the comments.
Definitely, appreciate those. So yeah.
Let's dive in. We're gonna go game by game this week. We're gonna talk Jacksonville and New England here first. I think this is by far the more enticing fantasy matchup, and I don't think that says a whole lot, but this is obviously a weekend with 4 very good defenses. Let's talk the New England side here first against Jacksonville. It's pretty clear, obviously, Brady has the highest floor. I just think even in this matchup, given the other names, although I don't hate Bortles either.
On a full slate, you're probably fading New England at their price tags. But on a 2-game slate, they're clearly in the best matchup. And it's playoffs, and it's the AFC Championship, and nobody else has been there before. And it's Tom Brady, who seemingly should be able to pick apart this potentially elite but inexperienced as well Jaguars defense. I know they looked great against Pittsburgh last week, and they did. People throw out the 42 points thing. The 42 points is because Pittsburgh was in comeback mode the entire time. And also Antonio Brown made some immaculate receptions. So I'm not worried about that happening this week. I do think the Jaguars have an elite defense, despite what a lot of people are saying. The problem is Tom Brady with those quick passes. So we're talking about Amendola, James White, Deion Lewis, Gronk, even Cooks on short passes, Chris Hogan. That I just see them slowly picking apart this Jags D and kind of frustrating them and creating long drives, maybe that result in field goals. So I love Gostkowski this week, but I just think Brady's going to do kind of what he did last week again.
That's I'm right there with you. I just think there's kind of no way that I see New England's going to stretch the field and kind of throw deep balls. They don't have that type of wide receiver to kind of go down. Cooks is not that guy. We've seen it a few times this year where they throw up these 50-50 balls to Cooks. I'm just kind of
No,
like
that's not
scratching
his
my head.
game.
What are you doing?
That's not his game, man. And he's a good receiver if utilized correctly. Once he beats the guy and he uses that speed to get open, he can make tremendous catches, but he's not a, hands away from the body, like over a defender, especially with Jalen Ramsey probably shadowing him. Kind of what you were alluding to. That's just not his game. So
Yeah, I just think, when you kind of look at the game and how it should kind of shape out, I do think, like you said, it's going to be a lot of Deion Lewis. It's going to be a lot of James White. It's going to be a lot of Gronkowski. Like those are just kind of the weaknesses for Jacksonville. They're 20th in DVOA against tight ends. They haven't allowed a ton of fantasy points this year, but I think that's just kind of more a predicament of their schedule and who they've faced this year. It just hasn't really been a lot. You mentioned kind of in comeback mode. Do you think that helped Vance McDonald last week, or do you think he was just kind of a guy who he was a weakness for this Jacksonville defense?
Nah, they were kind of using him as, everyone else is covered. So,
but that's how I kind of see Gronk this week. He's going to get 8 targets here. You can still stretch the field with Gronk. Gronk can go run a 20-yard vertical and go down, or he can run quick outs. He can run like. Gronk to me is the biggest mismatch for I think any defense. It doesn't matter for me.
So I look at it this way: is it the playoffs?
It's January 18th, so yes.
Then 100% Gronk exposure. That's just what I've been doing, and it's I think if you've done that at any point in his career, you're doing pretty good in the playoffs. So he just gets 100 yards and a touchdown. 80 yards and a touchdown. That's just what he's going to do. And there just aren't enough other premium receiving options on the slate to fade him. I just don't see how you could fade him at this stage. Even in a total blowout where they knew they were going to win, they still threw him that fade. And he doesn't need a lot of opportunities to absolutely mash a defense. Like he could get 7 targets and go for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. So, I don't care if it's a weakness for Jacksonville or not. I don't really care who they're playing. I just am playing Gronk, and we can break down the matchup, and I agree with you that it is a good matchup for him anyway. I just don't think anyone can cover him. Honestly, yeah. I don't think anybody can. So they're going to try. I think teams try, and we've seen a few times, like in that Jets game where they just doubled him every play. That was fine. Or who was it? Who was that team? They just doubled and tripled him every single play. I don't know if he didn't play week 17. It might have been the Oakland game. But one of those games I watched and he was just doubled every play and it kind of just shredded elsewhere, but I don't see that happening in the playoffs, man. I just see at least a touchdown and at least 80 yards floor.
Yeah. So. Before we get into the running game, let's talk a little bit about these wideouts. We talked about Cooks. I think you can obviously still get exposure because I still think there is some upside here. Just on a deep threat, there's always that potential for Cooks. He is a little bit cheaper. Amendola is coming off a monster target game with 13. He's a guy I have some interest in here. Obviously, if that potential's there, like you said, the dink and dunk, I think, is going to be the way they move the ball down the field, and that kind of fits Amendola's game.
Definitely. I like Amendola again this week. It would be very Patriots for them to use, Hogan or something like that, or maybe James White in the receiving backs more this week. But it certainly sets up to be an Amendola week because you just don't want to throw at Ramsey and Boye, you just don't want to if you don't have to. Obviously, Brown smoked Boye last week, but
That's we're talking Antonio Brown here, you know.
Right. That's very different. So um I I just think the Patriots are a really smart team, and smart teams will look at this defense and say, okay, you know, we don't need to go outside to win. So why would we just dink and dunk? And
That's
I think a lot of smart people are heading in that direction this week.
Yeah, that's the difference between New England and basically every other team
Mhm.
in the league at this point. It's, they pick your weaknesses and they go at them. They don't
Mhm.
test it. We saw Pittsburgh both times against Jacksonville just play idiotic football, and
Dumb,
it's
stupid.
it's
I think everyone collectively was like, all right, going into last week, just run the ball, short passes to Brown, short passes to Juju. And they did the same thing they did the other week they lost. They just tried to throw right into Jalen Ramsey. It's like, what are you doing? So, I mean, if the Patriots try to do that, I think the Jaguars can win, but it's just hard to see that happening.
Yeah. So I mean, you mentioned like Cooks and Hogan are going to have to deal with Boye and Ramsey, and I'm
Yep.
just not going that route. Amendola's going to have Aaron Colvin on him. Colvin's obviously been solid out of the slot this year, but once again, like he's still a guy who does allow an average catch rate for a slot guy. Like you're going to get those catches. You're not looking for touchdowns. You're kind of looking for 7 8 receptions for 80 yards. Like this is going to be an extremely low scoring week. 10 to 15 points out of some guys are not bad.
Right. It was kind of like Tevin Coleman last week we were discussing during the slate, and we had some exposure, and it was like, 10 points wasn't great. And obviously the way that slate went, well, you kind of needed some value guys, but it's like 10 points in a 4-game slate isn't the end of the world for a value guy, because there were a lot of ones last week. You know what I mean? Or zeros. So if you can get a guy that can get you 10 points, I think you're at least entertaining that.
Yeah, I think so too. So I think Amendola is kind of my preferred guy, and I think you can obviously sprinkle in, but it's Amendola, Gronk in the passing game, and we can move into the running backs. Deion Lewis, kind of your classic Deion Lewis game last week, where he racks up all the yards, and then James White gets a touchdown or 2 touchdowns. Bolden gets a touchdown. And now Rex Burkhead's back this week. I still don't worry for Lewis. Like Lewis, even at his price tag, like he's going to be used. He's going to be used wisely. Jacksonville's not great against pass catching backs. They're 15th in DVOA. We've seen 7.1 passing attempts go to running backs this year against Jacksonville. That's more than wide receiver 2s, 3s, and tight ends. I think both Lewis and White are massively in play, and I do think you can play them together.
I think we found that out last week. Especially, I'd say the most likely scenario, even if you're a Jaguars fan, is Patriots kind of roll here. I mean, I love their defense, but this is just so different in terms of trying to really project what this game's going to look like. I think we have to see the Patriots scoring some points here. So I'm all in on all three if they play. And by all in, I mean I'll be getting exposure with probably 100% Deion Lewis, but then White's going to be strong consideration, and then Burkhead's a great tournament guy. So I think you have to look strongly at all of them.
Yeah, I do too. What do you think of the defense this week? For me, it's going to be probably 100% Minnesota. I think even on the road. I think I'm going to be probably looking at that other game. I think more so. I know the Pats defense, we kind of talk about, oh yeah, there's always this potential for Bortles, but Jack's offense, I mean, 26.2 points per game this season. That was zero point 0.2 behind Pittsburgh. They only allowed 5.1 fantasy points per game to opposing defenses. Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, unless the pick six happens, like Jacksonville, it hasn't been great for defenses.
Well, let's talk about Fournette. Car crash, injured ankle, kind of chaotic few
Your
weeks.
best weapon against New England.
Your best weapon against New England. I think Yeldon is a potentially great play here. Even if Fournette, does play a significant role. Even without a rushing touchdown last week. He was still kind of in that value range on DK. He's going to be used on third downs, even with Fournette. We saw that last week. I think he's a pretty interesting guy on DK. Tough to get him in on FD, but for DK, I think he's in play either way, especially if you're trying to mix up your variation of running backs on, the slate.
Yeah, I definitely don't mind that call. I still think New England's defense, I just don't buy it. Like I think they're average at best, and I think their coaching staff makes up for a lot of gray area where they're not great in. And that's always kind of been the Patriots' way. Like, obviously earlier in their dynasty, like they had some great defenses, but kind of towards the end here, like you just get a really good offense and that kind of helps out the defense. So I think Jacksonville can put up some points here. And I don't mind. I'm not buying the Vegas total on Jacksonville. I'm willing to take the over.
Those Blake Bortles become Blake Bortles this week, though.
How long have we've been saying that all year though? But Bortles has been solid.
Well, he's definitely been Blake Bortles for about,
I mean,
in 4 or 5 games he was Blake Bortles this year.
The Bills game was abysmal, but Bortles looked competent last week. He made some good throws, and he's been 16 fantasy points in each of the 2 games here. Outside of Brady, Keenum, I think him and Foles, like they don't top out at 20 fantasy points. Like we're looking at quarterbacks from this game.
Oh no, I definitely agree from a fantasy perspective. I'm talking about from the Pats D perspective. So, I mean, there's definitely odds where Bortles just totally collapses. You know what I mean? And they're forced to throw even with him collapsing. So I think you have to entertain that for Pats D. But I do think they're going to score, barring a catastrophic, a Tim Tebow going into Foxborough type situation. I don't see that happening, but, it could be a blowout. It really could be.
Yeah, so. The range of outcomes are certainly there. But I think for me, like Bortles does come second to Brady, I think, on this slate in terms of who I get my exposure to at quarterback. I mean, would you put Bortles behind Foles and Keenum?
I think Bortles kind of pulls what Mariota did last week with the backdoor cover late touchdown. So yeah, I could see, even if the game's relatively close, I could see him getting that fourth quarter drive to get them within 10. You know what I mean? With like 3 minutes left, and Patriots are kind of in prevent. So he'll get some rushing yards. He'll kind of, work his way into some fantasy points. Like he's done, he's kind of just done that in these first 2 playoff games. So I think he'll figure something out. But
from a price perspective, I mean, he's $1,600 cheaper than Keenum on DraftKings. He's $200 more than Foles.
Yeah,
like that's just kind of an easier call for me to go that route, even on the road against New England.
I agree.
So, you talked a little bit about Yeldon. Let's kind of focus in on Fournette a little bit here. Obviously, coming off a monster game. I do worry about him a little bit this week. I think you obviously can get some exposure. I still don't think this New England defense is that great against the run. It's just the game script could be completely different if, like you said, New England gets out to a good lead. Everything has played out perfectly for Fournette in those 2 games against Pittsburgh this year.
I mean, I definitely think there's a contrarian angle here for the Jaguars, though. I think you could go, I guess I could see Jags D and Fournette, maybe they pull off what the Giants did those few times they beat the Pats and just get pressure and can run the ball. So, there's certainly that possibility of happening. This Jags team's really good. So if you want to play Fournette, you play Jags D with him. I think that's the classic like running back defense stack that we always talk about during the regular season. If you want to play Fournette, I think you play him with Jags D. And I don't think you necessarily stack because the Jaguars aren't going to win a 35-28 shootout against the Patriots. I don't think. I think they're going to try to win a 17-10 grind them out long drive type of game. So Play Fournette on DK. Hope to get that 100-yard bonus. Maybe he gets a few catches too. The ankle's a problem. That's the only thing.
Yeah, I'm worried about the ankle. I'm worried about the potential of New England just completely going up against the run and trying to just completely sell out because this passing game is still not good. And we can kind of launch into the wide receivers here. This is an ugly group of wide receivers to kind of break down right now because everyone's healthy. No one's seeing massive targets. No one's showing any upside because Bortles is only throwing the ball 24 times a game.
You can play Lee Westbrook, but I don't think they're serious high exposure type of wide receivers, even with a good matchup, because we've just seen how Jacksonville's playing this. So I don't have much interest. I'd rather take a chance on the other game with the receiving options.
Yeah, it's just we haven't seen the upside. The matchups aren't that great. I do have some interest in Allen Hurns here, just because he's going to grab the weaker of the cornerbacks. Like he's not going to see Gilmore and Butler. He's going to see Rowe of the slot. 0.34 fantasy points per route allowed by Rowe this year. I think Hurns is interesting. I like Lee. I like Westbrook. Like I like him as players. I don't like him this week. I think Hurns is the guy. I think we're going to see some weird, like you said, like Yeldon is. I think is in play. Mercedes Lewis is probably going to get some random targets too. So it's just too spread out. Like Keelan Cole might even get in the action. Like I don't know. I think Hurns is the guy to take it. They're all cheap enough to take a shot on. So I guess if you're building multiple lineups, but Hurns is weirdly my favorite, even though he hasn't been involved in these first two games.
I'm all set with that, but I mean, anything goes on a 2-gamer basically. Outcomes considered, but that's a deeper lineup construction type thought process for me.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're playing kind of the guys who have been involved more, I think Westbrook's probably the guy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, Jags D I think is definitely in play. I'm not taking a shot on Mercedes Lewis as a punt. Not entertaining.
100% Gronk.
Yep. Let's move on to this next game here. Minnesota and Philly, 2 top 5 defenses in this league. This is not a fun game. I don't think there's going to be a lot of offense in this game. I think this is going to be a battle of field position, a battle of not missing field goals. This is probably how this game shakes out.
Well, I think we can take a chance on Thielen and Diggs. So I think paying up for those guys is kind of where I'm probably going to be making my move this week. And I don't know if it's going to be Thielen or Diggs yet. I'm pretty sure it's going to be Thielen. But, you know, I think that's where I'm headed towards my main exposure for wide receiver. I don't know that I like that other game as much. In terms of upside, I actually do think Minnesota has decent upside against that Philly secondary. Obviously, their front, 7 is strong, but I could see Thielen or Diggs breaking a big one. So those are guys I really want to get exposure to.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I mean, out of this game, I think Minnesota here, even on the road, stands a better chance to put up some points. Just given that Keenum was under center, I like him more than Foles. Not being biased here, for me, he's shown obviously more. In terms of the matchups, I was completely wrong. I think a lot of people were last week. Lattimore ended up, covering Thielen on the outside. We saw Jarius Wright run a fair amount of routes out the slot. That's worrisome for me. Because obviously I think, if you put Thielen on the outside, I'm a little bit worried. Even in the slot, like I'm a little bit worried here. Patrick Robinson's been very solid this year. I like Diggs. Diggs is probably going to be the guy that I get my most exposure to. I don't mind Thielen. Even after last week, like put last week aside, even if they won that game without Diggs catching that massive ball, just the matchup with him against Jalen Mills, I think is just much more favorable for that secondary. And I mean, obviously you can get exposure to both, but I think Diggs is going to be my guy.
Yeah, I mean, Diggs hasn't been under 12, DK points since week 13. So clearly there's a shift in game plan and teams are putting way more emphasis on Thielen. We clearly saw that last week. So I agree with you there. I just do think those are the main guys for me at receiver, and I don't think it's particularly close, even with Cooks. So I think I want to get one of those guys in every single lineup. If maybe you could even play both, and that's probably in Keenum lineups. But again, I guess we can talk about Keenum first. I think. I mean, you mentioned the price difference. I think it might be worth it. I think he's a really good play. I guess I kind of like attacking this Philly secondary a little more than you. A home game in the cold, not great, but he does have the skill position players to make big plays for him. So I do like him. He's probably my number 2 over Bortles. They're not really colliding because your roster construction's totally different depending on who you go with. But I think I kind of lean Keenum. I guess I like the Vikings to win this game,
Yeah, I mean, I do too. I don't see Keenum leading the way. Like, I see the defense kind of leading the way to a win here.
Yeah.
I do think, 15 to 20 points is certainly in the range of outcomes for Keenum this week. But it's also kind of in the same range of outcomes for Bortles this week. So I think that's kind of where I take the price difference. But I'm definitely going to have some Keenum exposure. Like you said, like it's still a good stack. I definitely don't mind targeting this Philly secondary. Like Robinson's been fine. Darby's been beatable at times. Mills obviously is a guy I don't mind beating. I do want to talk Rudolph here. I think Kyle Rudolph's an interesting option. Not on FanDuel because I still think you just kind of lock in Gronk. But on DraftKings, I mean, obviously you can go the 2 tight ends here. He's going to be a guy who's going to get red zone looks. He saw targets last week. Could have had a touchdown there in the red zone. Like, he's had 7 red zone touchdowns this year. Philly's only 17th in DVOA against tight ends. They're kind of like Jacksonville where they're not that great, but they also didn't play a ton of guys that were great tight ends, that were great fantasy tight ends. So Rudolph's another one I think is an interesting option because – like you said, this is not a good wide receiver week with Jacksonville. I'm not a big fan of Philly's wideouts this week, although I do think you can take shots. So with that being said, I think Rudolph's an interesting flex play.
Yeah, if you're not going running back, I say Rudolph's probably your main flex guy. But I probably do think you'll eventually lean towards going running back in your third flex. But Rudolph's a great play. As you mentioned, breaking down the matchup, pretty solid overall. But just in terms of guys who are getting targets at this time of the year, it's Thielen and Diggs, and then Rudolph is probably even more so used in the red zone. So I like him quite a bit. That one, if he gets a 1 touchdown and 40 yards, you're cooking. At 4,500 on DK. So probably my main flex if it's not a running back.
Somehow Jarius Wright popped up into the play calling last week. He saw 6 targets, caught 3 of them for 56 yards. This is a guy who hasn't seen over 5 targets all year. He's bare min. I don't hate the option if you're just looking to punt and you kind of are buying the Minnesota passing game a little bit more.
I mean, it's a YOLO play. He's min, so if you want to make a weird lineup, you could definitely think about throwing him in there.
Pretty and it's not like his competition is that strong. Like, It literally is all the Jacksonville wide receivers down there, and then, like, him.
So I definitely think that's in play. Not something I'm super excited about, and I don't think you are either, but
no.
In terms of a guy who's going to get a few targets, that's really what we're looking at. At this point, especially if you want to pay up, Gronk, Thielen, Diggs, maybe you go with a full Keenum thing or Thielen, Cooks, Gronk, Brady, and then, you got to get weird somewhere. So definitely agree. He's, Michael Floyd got a goal line target. I don't necessarily think he's in play, but it's worth noting. Aguilar and Jeffrey.
Well, Minnesota's my defense this week. Before we jump on Philly's side, I will say I think Minnesota's my defense here.
Minnesota's your defense?
I just can't see Foles moving. They made Drew Brees look like a rookie quarterback for about a half, and then obviously Drew Brees kind of let loose in the second half. But I know
Right.
obviously it's a little bit different on the road, but this is obviously a damn good defense. You and I, we talked a lot during that Eagles game last week, and we were just kind of watching that offensive line just mash Atlanta, and they were able to run the ball. I don't think they're going to have that easy of a time this year or this week. Minnesota, fifth in DVOA against the run. They allowed just 3.7 yards per carry. The Giants had a little bit of issues here hanging on to the football of late.
I definitely agree. They're not going to be able to do what they did to Atlanta. They're going to be able to run the ball on pretty much anyone, but like you mentioned, I think Minnesota is going to make that a much tougher, situation. Ajayi can always break one, and I guess we'll get into that in a sec here. But yeah, I think Minnesota's probably the top play, and then I'd say New England is really close for me,
Yeah,
especially for 300 cheaper on DK.
yeah, I think those are kind of the two defenses I'm looking the most at. I do like the Jacksonville Fournette stack because Jacksonville's obviously got a severe price drop because they're facing New England, so that's cooked into their algorithm a bit. I think you were kind of wanting to jump into the Philly wide receivers.
I mean,
At least to talk about, like you were kind of hinting at.
yeah, I mean, you can play them. You know what I mean? That's kind of how I'm looking at it. It's a bad matchup, especially for Jeffrey. I think you can play Aguilar more so than Jeffrey, but on this type of slate, 10 points is not bad. And on, either site, really on FanDuel, if you can get 8, you just need like 8 from your receivers. Obviously, you don't want to pay 6, 7K and get 8, but it's better than 1, and that's kind of what we're looking at. So on DK, I think you can play Aguilar with relative confidence. He's going to get targets. I think we saw some nice screen passes and short targets to him that are going to be there every week. It was just a really bad weather game with that wind and all that craziness. So just the game flow of that game kind of limited everything. I think he's pretty high floor, even though he only got 3 targets.
Yeah, they're going to use him in very creative ways to try and open up space. That's one of the beneficial things about Aguilar over Jeffrey this week. Jeffrey just doesn't have that capability, and he's shadowed by Xavier Rhodes. Like I don't like targeting Rhodes, so I don't mind Aguilar here. I mean, Terrence Newman's been solid, but I just think the creativity with Aguilar, like you can feel confident using him. Torrey Smith, I guess, is somewhat interesting because he draws the easiest matchup of this group. He saw 4 targets last week, caught 3 of them for 39 yards. The matchup here against Trey Wayne's always a guy that we do like to target. He's targeted the most out of these Minnesota guys, 23% of routes covered. I don't hate Torrey Smith. He's as a punt option.
I hate Torrey Smith, but that doesn't mean he's not in play. You know what I mean? He's terrible at this stage in his career. He's basically just there to run routes and be a decoy. But last week, played pretty well. So sure.
Yeah. Running backs. So I can't get behind Philly this week. I can't get behind the running backs. Sorry, this Minnesota defense is just way too good. Both these rush defenses are just excellent. We kind of glossed over the Minnesota running backs. I like McKinnon over Murray this week.
I do too. Yeah, no, I do too. I think, McKinnon saw 4 targets last week. They're gonna try to be finding very unique ways to move the ball, and I don't think running it straight up the gut is gonna work like it usually does, and it has worked for Minnesota this year. It's too bad we don't get Dalvin Cook, but McKinnon is sort of that receiving option that is highly explosive and could break open a playoff game. So. Philly's been good pretty much against running backs in all facets this year, but I think McKinnon could do some damage. I think you can play Ajayi. Like, I think you can play him, but there's not a ton of, upside in this. There's just not a ton of upside anywhere this week. That's really the point. You're
Yeah.
just kind of hoping for them to get a fumble to the 1 yard line and then he can punch it in.
And that's where like McKinnon's interesting because we kind of look at the guys who have had some success against Philly this year. We saw it last week. Coleman, much more athletic.
Mm-hmm.
He had, a lot of the success over Freeman. Freeman just had really tough times, getting going. You're looking for double-digit fantasy points. You're not looking for anything crazy. And I think guys that can get that, who we've seen get that. We've seen Chris Thompson get that twice this year against Philly. We saw McCaffrey. We saw Austin Eckler. Like some of these guys who are in a similar skill set as McKinnon, it's much more than the guys who are just kind of more power backs like Murray. You got to have a little bit of athleticism to beat this Philadelphia defense. And I think that's kind of where McKinnon has a little bit of an edge. But then again, like he's more just kind of a pivot away from like James White and a pivot away from New England backs because they'll be the more chalkier options.
Yeah, I think if you just want to be simple, just go with Dion Lewis. Just make sure Dion Lewis is in all your lineups. Barring an injury, he's going to be scoring fantasy points again.
Yeah, and James White as well.
And James White as well.
So I don't like kickers from those games. I think, like you said, Gostkowski's probably the guy that I'm getting the exposure to.
Sure, and I think we saw last week, Lambeau. I think Jags are going to be able to move the ball, whether that's in garbage time or, at some point in the game. I think Lambeau is going to get a few opportunities. Maybe Danny won't like this because they're 9-point dogs, but even in a blowout, I think they're going to get some points by the end of the game.
What does Danny like, to be honest?
Nothing.
No, he doesn't like anything at all.
Seltzer.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and Miller Lite. That's all Denny likes.
Yeah.
What a sad life he lives.
Yeah, it's sad.
Who you got moving on this week?
I don't know.
Thank you.
I just want to enjoy the games, have my DFS sweats. It's going to be a fun weekend. I think these are 4 good teams. Philly kind of like, when, you talk too much at the bar, you go outside and then the dude you're talking smack to has 3 buddies and they're just beating you up. And then that one dude just puts his boot right into your mouth and breaks all your teeth.
What's going on?
I've been watching too much Peaky Blinders lately. Well, that's what happened to me with Philly last week. They were so much better than Atlanta.
Oh, this is actually a very great time to talk about how right I was and how wrong you were.
Yes.
About that game.
Atlanta was every break went their way and they just got obliterated. I mean, obliterated. Philly, was turning the ball over. I mean, they almost didn't get that touchdown to start off. They almost fumbled on the 1 yard line. They fumbled 2 other times, constant mistakes early in the game. And they were just so much better that it really didn't even matter. It was amazing to watch Atlanta just crumble, and not crumble because they're bad. Just Philly's awesome. So hats off. They're good. They're a good team.
Yeah. Minnesota and New England, I think, is the Super Bowl that we're looking at here, but I don't think it would shock me if Philly pulled out a home victory as well, just because that defense has been good. They can definitely go win a game.
Cold weather kind of takes away some of the deep throws a little bit. But yeah, I think Minnesota's probably the better team.
Yeah, so that's it for us. Once again, thank you for tuning in this year. It's weird because you and I, when football season ends, we don't talk for 5 months. Like we literally just cut off all communication and then pick things back up in August.
As it should be. That's how men do things.
It's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
No actual emotion. It's just football.
Right.
Just football and nothing else. And I don't care. I don't care how you're doing. You don't want to know how I'm doing, and I'm going to go smoke a pack of Carltons and die of lung cancer in 3 years. And that's because that's how men do it, right?
It's very true. It's very true, Russ.
Yep.
So, once again, you can head over to fantasycafe.com. We do have cheat sheets up in your dashboard. Optimizer is good to go as always. And for once, we will not see you next week.
Bummer. All right, guys. We'll see you next time. It was fun. I had a fun year. It's fun.
Yep. I did too. Most weeks. This is a horrendous sign off. We're pushing this. We're struggling to hit the stop broadcast button, but I'm going to do it. So
just hit stop. Yeah,
yep.
Just end it. I don't want to see these people ever again.
All right, guys. Good luck this weekend.